One of Sahil Bloom's responses to Chris Williamson on the Modern Wisdom podcast was so ordinary, and yet it struck me because it was also extremely profound. And I'll explain what I meant. So what happened was Sahil had a very impressive, well thought through insight. And Chris's response wasn't what someone would think, if especially since the other person being interviewed has just had such an impressive insight. You'd expect them to be praised. And yet Chris didn't praise Sahil. He kind of didn't even acknowledge it at all, and he asked another question. And this to me was so peculiar because the insight was so intelligent. And so I watched Sahil closely following this, and he didn't look disturbed at all. And that was what shocked me. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, I just want to make clear that it's not necessarily a problem that Chris didn't praise him. In fact, I think it's probably better, because if Chris were to go through all his podcasts just praising his guests for intelligent answers, then he would spend the whole podcast praising them, and that would hinder his ability to receive answers, because the whole time would be spent praising each other. So obviously there's no problem on Chris's side, and there's no problem on Sahil's side, and that's what I want to talk about, how they managed to get it so right. How did they manage to let this thing fall perfectly into place with seemingly such little thought about how the interaction was actually going on? So what I'm essentially saying here is, if you, to use an analogy, is if you had a problem with your car, you would rather, in that particular instance, immediately be a mechanic, as opposed to immediately have a manual in front of you. And the reason is because this mechanic has experience, knows the manual off by heart, and knows what to do, knows how to look at the car, how to investigate the issue, and how to solve a problem. But you then have to go and interpret this problem, have to read the manual, have to level yourself up. There's a massive process in order to resolve your issue. And similarly, if you had another problem in front of you, instead of having a tool set where you have to, one of those versatile tool sets where you attach the different screws on, the different screw heads on the end of the screw, instead of having one of those, you'd rather just always have the right tool at your disposal. Another scenario is, instead of being an octopus or a shapeshifter to fit into particular spaces, into particular scenarios, instead of being that, you'd rather just always fit. And this is the thing with Sahil and Chris. Sahil, he just fit. It just worked in that situation. For many other people, they would have sought approval after their clever answer. They would have felt proud, as I saw that Sahil did feel proud, because it was an intelligent answer and he has the right to. But he didn't dwell on it. He didn't feel an obligation, an entitlement to a praising response. That's not how he felt, and you could see that because his immediate response to the way that Chris responded was just moving forward, answering the next question. He didn't seem fazed at all. And we need to develop ourselves in such a way that we're predisposed to approach situations and scenarios in ways that are optimal, without having to reach into our toolbox, without having to look for the appropriate tool for that particular situation. So in life, we tend to gather protocols, rules, ideas, ways about handling situations. We tend to have developed some type of if this, then this type of framework that we approach the world with. If someone gets angry, then I respond in this way. If this person is late, then I respond in this way. If this is going to be an important meeting, then I need to prepare in this way. That's a type of way that we approach life. But this is an ineffective way, because it relies on you, in the particular instance, to remember all of the tools that you have at your disposal to choose the correct tool and then to implement it. This is much less efficient than immediately having the correct tool at your disposal. It's like having a nurse at your side that immediately passes you the correct tool. That's a much more efficient way, a much better way at handling life situations. So Sahil there has a developed personality. He doesn't need to look into his social toolbox and understand that if he gives a clever answer but it's not recognized, that's not a good response for him to then go and seek the praise that he thinks he deserves. So we all know this, but we might have, in that particular instance, still have gone to seek the praise. And the reason why we know this is because we know this on a tool-based level. We've gathered life experience and we understand that this is something that we shouldn't do. Okay? But there are things that are a bit less clear-cut. And you might think that in that particular scenario, because your value system is set up in such a way that you value the praise more so than you value an intellectual discussion, you might have gone for the praise in that situation and have made a snarky comment or something to try and bring the conversation back to that topic so that you can eventually receive your praise. Now that's the wrong response, and it's so easy to fall into that trap. And if we rely on tools and on systems that we've thought up in advance for particular scenarios, pre-specified solutions, then what happens is when a situation arises, we end up having to dig into our toolbox to apply the correct remedy to that situation. And by that point in time, the trigger which caused us to look into the toolbox has already meant that we've had a social blunder. It's already meant that we've had a problem, that we've encountered a problem, because we've identified that we're feeling upset. And through this identification of us feeling upset, we then go and seek the tool for the particular situation. But if we had our personality developed in such a way that we didn't need to look for the tool in the first place because we weren't upset in the first place, that's a much more optimal solution. That solution is much more productive, is a much better solution in life. You don't want to make the blunder and that blunder be the call to action to go look for a tool to prevent yourself from blundering further. And this is not just about social situations, this is about all situations in life. We might have productivity systems, and our productivity systems call for us to act in a certain way when we recognize that we are procrastinating. And by that stage, it's already too late. We've already procrastinated. We don't want to have to recognize that we are experiencing a problem or about to experience a problem and then frantically have to look for the correct tool to apply to the situation. We want to avoid these situations in the first place. We want to be someone who's predisposed to work hard. We don't want to remedy procrastination in retrospect. We want to obliterate the possibility for it in advance. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to predispose ourselves in the best possible way. And this means we have to change our value system. So the way that we do this is we change what we value. We have to value authenticity. We have to value truly being disposed to do things in the correct way. We have to value being a better person. Because if we value that, then we find ways to become a better person without relying on external tools or systems or having to call on things in particular situations. Then we don't have to call on these things, because once we've valued being a person, a higher quality individual, regardless of your realm, whether that be a social realm, productivity, whatever it is, once we value being truly good at that particular thing, then we do not have to call on tools because we have the correct frame of mind in advance. That means we are not predisposed to blunder. That's what I'm trying to get at here. And this is why it's so obvious when people are inauthentic in conversations, when you might have a friend that always seems like they have an agenda, trying to prove themselves to you or trying to say something or trying to boast. And the reason why they do this is because they value the wrong things. They don't value being the best possible person. They value the praise, or they value these other things. But they know inherently that boasting is not a good trait, and so they end up doing something that equates to humble bragging. They will try and steer the conversation towards their achievements, but they will never expressly be proud about them. And we all know this type of person, and they've got it all wrong. They're approaching life with a tool-based approach. We want to approach life the correct way from the outset. We don't want to have a delayed response that then sets us on the right tracks. We want to be on the right tracks from the get-go. In order to be on the right tracks from the get-go, we actually have to identify that that's something that we want. We want to be a better person. And then we will be able to move ourselves in that direction. So Sahil Bloom doesn't have to call on any tools. He has developed his personality to the point that he will act in a favorable way in situations without having to think too hard about it. And that's just because that's the type of person that he is. So that's what we want to develop for ourselves as well.